Hello and welcome to this very special event, Staying Strong and Proud, celebrating deaf and disabled people's resistance. This is a coming together of two wonderful organisations of DPAC, Disabled People Against the Cuts, and of the People's Assembly Against Austerity. We've come together on this very, very special day, which is the International Day of Disabled People and is Disability History Month. We are going to hear so many different contributions tonight. We want you to feel welcome. I'm so pleased to say that my co-host this evening is the wonderful Ellen Clifford. She's a disabled activist, member of DPAC National Steering Group since 2011, and author of The War on Disabled People, Capitalism, Welfare, and the Making of a Human Catastrophe, which was published earlier this year by Zed Books. Ellen's going to talk to us now a little bit about this year's Disability History Month. She's going to explain to us about why it's so important. I'm going to hand over to her. You're going to see a lot of us coming in and coming out. We just are so pleased you're with us. So good evening to you all. Sit back, relax, and we hope you enjoy this wonderful event. Over to you, Ellen.
Thanks, Laura. Disabled People Against Cuts are so pleased that the People's Assembly are co-hosting this event alongside us because we are stronger together with our allies. The International Day of Disabled People is something that disabled people celebrate every year, and it falls in the middle of Disability History Month, which always runs from the middle of November until the middle of December. And it traditionally has a theme. The theme that was chosen for this year is access. And that's because this year is the 25th anniversary of the passage of the Disability Discrimination Act, which was then replaced by the Equality Act 2010. I can't believe the years have flown that quickly. So it was always going to be a significant year when we would be looking back and thinking about what progress has been made over the years. It's undoubtedly true that the DDA has achieved progress for deaf and disabled people, given us access to education and to employment. It was never actually something that disabled people campaigned for. We wanted a civil rights bill, but this was what we got. And it has, for all its many limitations, the legislation has created progress for us. Of course, what it didn't stop is the brutal impacts of the pandemic on disabled people this year. If disabled people thought that welfare reform and austerity were bad, then, along came COVID. As I know many of you watching will be aware, nearly two-thirds of the deaths of disabled people from March until July, according to official figures, were of disabled people. It was 60% according to the ONS figures, but that's likely to be a gross underestimation because the only way they can measure the deaths of disabled people was referring back to the 2011 census, which will be outdated. There will have been many more deaths. Also, disabled people have been disproportionately represented in excess deaths since that time. On International Day of Disabled People, we always traditionally remember those who we've lost and the victims of disability hate. It's a time when we usually reflect upon the most extreme example of that, which happened in Nazi Germany, when at least 275,000 disabled adults and children were murdered systematically as part of the Action T4 programme. It's also a time when disabled campaigners remember those that we've lost over the year. And this is the worst year that DPAC has ever had. Disabled people are used to losing our friends and our loved ones prematurely. But nearly half of those campaigners that DPAC has lost since we were first founded in 2010 have come since January this year. I don't want to pick out individuals, but I do think that we should acknowledge the great contribution that Sean McGovern, who was co-chair of the TUC Disabled Workers Committee, made to the movement. And I know Dave Allen, who's stepped into his post, will be reflecting on Sean's legacy later today. Also Manjeet Kaur, who was an activist in Manchester, is another person that we're feeling the loss of this year. So IDDP is a time of sadness, but it's also a time when we celebrate our identities as people who live with illness, with impairment labels and diagnoses, who face disabling barriers in society, hence the term disabled people. We are disabled by society. We celebrate our identities as people who fight every day of our lives, and therefore are pretty good at resistance. So I'll hand back to Laura to give the outline of the evening. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ellen. I'm just going to take a tiny pause because I think we're having some technical difficulties. That's not a shock. There's lots and lots and lots of different accounts being used. I'm just going to keep speaking in the knowledge that I might have to repeat myself. So a massive apologies to anyone who is watching. Hello. So the technical difficulty is that Facebook is being a bit weird. So I'm going to ask everybody, weird on this broadcast, I'm going to ask everybody who is watching on Facebook to go to YouTube to watch this. We're going to help you get there. We're going to put the links on to Facebook now. We're going to make sure that you know exactly where to go to, and we're going to explain what's going to happen for the rest of the event. Apparently, Twitter and YouTube are absolutely fine. It's just a problem with Facebook. This event is too important to not keep going, so we are going to keep going. Let me explain how tonight is going to work. I'll just remind people, if we're a bit frozen and a bit jumpy on Facebook, then you should head over to YouTube or to Twitter. I know not everybody has all of the different platforms, but YouTube should be fine, and we're going to put the link to that now. So this is how tonight is going to work. There's going to be a series of panels where you will hear from some amazing activists from across the movement and from different organisations. We're also going to have a performance. We've got people here who can perform too. I'm just going to ask now that we're just going to remind people that there is a hashtag for this event. So there's two. One to kind of join up with our international colleagues, but I'm going to give you both of them. So the hashtags for these events are hashtag IDDP 2020, and there's another one, hashtag IDPWD 2020. I found that quite hard to say. I'm going to repeat it. It's hashtag IDDP 2020 and IDPWD 2020. Please use that hashtag to have conversations, share memories of campaigns you've been involved in and what you have been doing to celebrate Disability History Month. I'm going to hand over to Ellen now to introduce our first speaker.
Thanks, Laura. It is my very great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, who is Sherilee Houston, who is an actor on Coronation Street playing Izzy Armstrong, but I know her best as a strong campaigner who supported disabled people fighting against the closure of the Independent Living Fund and is actively supporting people to challenge problems to access to work, which I'm sure many of you watching will know all about. Over to you, Sherilee.
Thank you, Ellen. Well, I thought, gosh, I speak a lot in public, but what do you say when you're talking to people who know what you're talking? Do you know what I mean? It's a lot easier to tell people about things they don't understand. Whereas I was going, oh, talking to disabled people, but we all get it. So I was thinking, actually, what would I want? What would I want to hear today? And I thought, actually, a little bit of hope. A little bit of hope. So, okay, hello, I'm Sherilee Houston. I'm a white woman. I'm wearing a patterned headscarf. I've got curly hair. Patterned headscarf is to hide my grey. And I'm holding a stick with the word hope written on it, attached to a piece of cardboard. Now, I did a speech earlier this year and I pulled up lots of these because I was trying to adapt to the way of being on Zoom and trying to make it a bit more interesting. And I kept holding up a stick going, there's 14.1 million of us. And it's so true. I think we've had such a ridiculous year. And at the start of this year, Francis Ryan said, disabled people have been training for this all of our lives, and we have. And that's why I wanted to bring a bit of hope, because I know it's so shit at the moment. It's just, I can't believe how much our community have to keep fighting and keep getting somewhere and then it being ripped away. And that's why I wanted to talk about hope, because I think we just have to still hold on to that really hard. And it made me think, actually, what's my world is storytelling. So all the best stories, they always get a bit tricky before it gets a bit better. And I think this year has been a game changer for us, even in the shittest ways, shittiest ways, really. But what it's also done for us is change the world on communication, change the world that actually they can see that they can make massive adjustments and it's okay and it works. And I think that's what I'm trying to hold on to, is hope, because I think we're having to put our heads down and really fight again. But what's brilliant is that we're a disabled community, but this being able to communicate via Zoom is enabled us to get into rooms we'd never got into. And it's also enabled us to create our community much stronger. And I think that's going to be a game changer, is because together, we're always saying this, it's the hashtag, isn't it? Together Stronger. So I write everywhere, trust yourself, believe, because I just think sometimes our battle is so hard. And it made me think of this anecdote of, I was on a mindfulness course and they were talking about, finding the delight in the smallest things. And I was at that stage in my disability where I was not with acceptance at all. And I think now, 20 years later, I've a load of nice times just going, that feels quite nice on my skin, or that moment of breath is really lovely. And I think that's the things I wanted to share today, to remind you, to remind ourselves, really, have a little bit of hope, because we've learnt to communicate differently. We really have. So I wrote down some things that I thought was great about being disabled. I love the fact that I spend most of my life figuring out how to get forwards, doing everything by the seat of my pants. But that's quite useful. I go to sleep in tomorrow's clothes sometimes. I get really delighted at the look in people's eyes when they change their attitude towards you. When that penny drops and they see you as a human. I'm pretty good at smuggling. I know exactly when my mate's shoulder's dislocated just by looking at her. I love being part of a secret club that when things are a bit shitty, when something really bad's happening, you can always catch a fellow member's eye and see their glint. as disabled people, we're so solution focused. We're really down with acceptance. In fact, we're really good mates with acceptance. We're always over delivering because everyone always expects. I love being able to put my chair and incline on a train to have a snooze. I've seen so many different scenes of different places and events because I can't get in the same way as everybody else. But I'm not saying I'll miss that when it's gone, but I'm enjoying the insight, the kitchens in hotels, the service lifts, the long old corridors at railway stations, stately homes. I try and find the joy in the difference, I suppose. I love being able to carry as many bags as I like on the back of my chair. I love being able to go about unseen because this can give you many perks. But what I love the most about being disabled is it's me. It's who I am. The strengths and humour that disability has gifted me, and the hope and the joy and the delight in the dark. It's the strength of hope that it's given us will get us through this last push for change. And I get so excited because the generation below us have already got loud voices. They've been allowed to dream because of what our generations have done. We're beginning to see them on our screens. They're being more active in society. And I just want to say, let's just hold on to hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Sheryl Lee. You definitely did bring hope. We are going to move now to our first panel, if you like, because I don't think Grace Blakely is quite with us just yet. Grace Blakely is going to be coming very soon. We're going to move now to our first panel after that outstanding contribution from Sheryl Lee Houston. Okay, so panel one is, we're going to be joined by loads of different contributors, but I'm coming first of all to Jess Thom, aka Tourette's Hero, comedian, activist, and co-founder of Tourette's Hero. So hello and welcome. Hello. I've met so many amazing people, but just not in the same room as them for a long time. I wonder, Jess, could you give us a brief overview of what the pandemic has been like for disabled people and how grassroots groups and organisations like Tourette's Hero have stepped in to fill the gaps left by official or kind of state responses?
Biscuit. Yes. So hello, I'm Jess. I am an artist, an activist, and the co-founder, Biscuit, of an organisation called Tourette's Hero. Biscuit. I also have Tourette syndrome, which means I make movements and noises I can't control, called tics. I'm going to describe myself briefly in case this is useful for anyone. I'm a 40-year-old white woman of average build with short curly brown hair and a very cool wheelchair. Biscuit. I'm a big believer in the social model of disability, the idea that it's not our impairments that are the sole disabling factors in our lives, but the barriers we experience because of a failure to consider difference and a diversity of bodies and minds in how society is organised. And I think that what became very clear very quickly with the pandemic is that it was a demonstration of the social model in action. Like many people, as society changed overnight, the structure of our society changed overnight, we noticed the barriers increasing and changing for disabled people. It wasn't just in March we suddenly had a whole new load of things to think about. It was that the fundamental way that our society had been structured had changed, and therefore there were lots of barriers and very little thought given to how disabled people and people with non-normative experiences were going to access the basics like food, healthcare, personal protective equipment. And so I think our invisibility within rushed policies was something that, as a disabled-led organisation, Tourette's Hero was very aware and tuned into. We were also very aware that there was a very medical and charity model response. So lots of the understanding about risk was very medical focused and didn't consider all of the sort of social and structural reasons that we're disabled and can't access our communities or services equally. Biscuit. And there was also a danger that our support would fall down charity lines, and that traditional models of how we thought about disability that weren't centering disabled people would be very dominant. And so Tourette Zero responded very quickly with a series of trying to be very pragmatic. So we're normally a creative arts organisation. We pivoted away from that, focusing on a sort of essential emergency response, including providing a disabled-led delivery service to disabled Londoners, and a sort of support and solidarity response to the sort of national population of disabled and neurodiverse people across the UK. I think that one of the things that I'm very, very aware of is how risk has been understood, and how many people have been missing in the very narrow definitions and understandings of risk. And because disabled people are not present in the rooms and Zooms where decisions are being made, our perspectives are often missing. And so I think it's vital to have organisations like DPAC, individual disabled people speaking up, giving and receiving solidarity, finding solutions and drawing attention to the barriers. We've seen incredible campaigns like Where's the Interpreter, and great allyship and practical aids, FRI Law's legal letter challenging supermarkets around access to delivery slots. But it speaks to a much bigger issue. We've had 10 years of austerity that have destroyed opportunities and many hard-won equalities, and the pandemic has come on top of that. So I think we need to focus on building capacity to resist, supporting future generations of disabled activists, and creating tools that mean that we can connect internationally across borders to make sure that our movements are as powerful as possible. Hedgehog, biscuit, sausage, fuck a sheep.
Thank you so much, Jess, for that contribution. And I think it has been absolutely apparent that where the state has failed or exacerbated the inequalities through inaction, it has been organisations like yours that have had to step in and provide that immediate solidarity, that immediate support. So thank you so much, honestly, for that contribution. And if you haven't heard of Tourette's Hero, go and look them up as an organisation. Thank you so much, Jess, Tom. We were supposed to hear from Sabina Lahoux. She's from People First organisation and DPAC too, but because of issues with technology, and I think this is again a reason that we are here tonight and we have to keep campaigning, so many people are technologically excluded, and Sabina is one of those people. So we wish she could have been here tonight but isn't, and I'm sure again we'll try and organise something where she can take part. We've got a film next to show you from Jeanette Coringa, DPAC Bristol and South West, talking about the difficulties facing disabled asylum seekers. So over to the video.
Well, I am Janet, and I'm asylum seeker in Bristol, and I would like to speak about few things about disabled people and more about we asylum seekers. As this lockdown has been in since March, we have been struggling as asylum seekers, disabled and undisabled. The main problem we have been getting as asylum seekers is that all the shops you could have not buy anything if you don't have any card for bank card. And most of us asylum seekers, we are not eligible to open an account. So that was one of the challenges, because you have to find somebody to go with or to send with the money and give money so that they can be able to buy something to use. So that is one of the challenges that we asylum seekers we have got. And another challenge we have got is about food, because as we asylum seekers, you know very well, we live by £5 a day. And so we have been locked down. £5 cannot be enough, because normal days, we have been going out. We have been going out and eat to a refugee rice or somewhere else, and you can go to this food bank and get something to eat. So it has been very, very hard for people to live without managing food or without getting outside or without getting any help from anybody. And to this government, we have noticed that they never consider asylum seekers, refugees, or disabled or whoever. They don't recognize the problems that we get because they never add even a penny to those people who has been locked down. So that has been great challenge that we have been getting too much.
Thank you so much. Next up, we're going to hear from Grace Blakely. She is with us. In a second, I'm going to disappear, but you might know Grace Blakely from, well, loads of places, from Question Time, from social media. She's written publications galore too. Her latest is Corona Crash. You might have seen it. I think I've got that right, Grace. If I haven't, please say it again. But Grace is going to talk to us about the gross inequalities that have emerged in the coronavirus crisis. Grace Blakely, thank you so much, and it's over to you.
Thanks so much, Laura, and thanks everyone for having me. It's great to be here. And yeah, I just, I think that the pandemic and all the issues that that we've seen come to kind of the forefront of our society have really, well, should at least have really restored a focus on the importance of the disability movement in our politics and as part of the left more broadly. So I'm really pleased to be here. So the thing I talk about in the book, The Corona Crash, and which is, I think, something that is really important to come back to as we're now seeing a kind of more interventionist Conservative Party, is the idea of austerity as a class project rather than just an economic project. I think often the left has come back at this idea of austerity as an economic project by saying, well, we can borrow at very low interest rates, as long as there's demand for our government bonds, then we're going to be able to spend as much as we like. As long as the spending's for investment, then, it's fine. All of these things are true, although some of them are problematic in their own ways, because some of the stuff that has been said around spending for investment versus spending for consumption involves creating this arbitrary distinction between investing in like roads, bridges, and railways rather than investing in people and in human beings, which is often classed as consumption. So that's got some problems in and of itself. But I think there's this broader problem that in responding to these economic arguments, we haven't really been thinking about the foundations of austerity as a project. And really, the foundations of austerity as a project have nothing to do with these economic arguments that are often made by those on the right. What it's all about is a project of class power. It's about making sure that in the wake of the biggest financial crisis we'd seen in generations, that working people would be the ones who were forced to pay for that crisis, not those at the very top. And we can see that happening again today. Over the last 10 years, the wealth of the wealthiest has skyrocketed. Inequality has risen. House prices have exploded. Stock markets have recovered. And yet it's been some of the most marginalized people in our society who have faced a decade of wage stagnation, who've been forced to go through the kind of indignities of the benefits process. And indeed, attempting to kind of engage with the welfare system as a disabled person has become unbelievably traumatizing, as many people on this call will know. And yet the richest have been protected. And I think we're going to see something similar to that today. We're already seeing it, because what has the state done? What have the Conservatives done over the course of the pandemic? They've dished out money to big business. They've dished out money to the banks. They've bailed out all sorts of private institutions, and yet they're going to come back and tell us when this is over, this all has to be repaid. The money went to those at the top, but the repaying is going to be done by those at the bottom. I think there's a very obvious case that big business has often done extremely well out of these crises. All you have to do is look at the big tech companies, look at Amazon, Google, that have seen their share prices soar. And even those businesses that have gone under, like Arcadia, for example, the Philip Greens of this world walk away with their pockets full. So clearly, in order to kind of push back against this class project from above, what we really need is a class project from below. And that's why, I think it's so important to focus on on the question of building a movement. I've only got 30 seconds left, so I can't go into exactly how we need to do that. But I think, the disabled movement is such an important part of that. And it needs to encompass the labour movement, it needs to encompass social movements, the movement for environmental justice, for economic justice. And actually, that is really where I think the left, in this crucial period of transition, needs to be focusing our efforts in building that project of class power from below. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Grace. It's so nice to see you.
It's so nice to see you.
Yeah, even if it's just for a few minutes of your excellent contribution. Unfortunately, the inequalities that have grown and the way that wealth has been sucked further and further up, even in a crisis, in fewer and fewer hands, is quite staggering. I'm just going to remind people before I go on to our next panelist that there's some difficulties with Facebook, so please go over and watch all of these amazing contributions on YouTube and on Twitter, where things are working smoothly. So I'm coming now to Raymond Johnson. He's a People First and DPAC activist. Have we got Raymond here?
Hi guys, how are you?
Hello, hi Raymond. I want to ask you, how easy has it been for, not easy, how has it been for people with learning difficulties to keep up with what has been going on throughout this crisis?
Well, can I just ask to say about at the beginning of this crisis, and when I feel that we were getting around lockdown, and basically it was just like Prime Minister in comes on the TV, told us all to stay at home when the first lockdown happened, and we got sort of alerts on our phones to say that we all got stay at home and all this sort of thing. And then it's just saying about the information that they gave us, it was a bit, it's really sort of, wasn't clear about what people should do and all that sort of stuff like that. In fact, when I've been working with the Syrup project, we've been asking people who got lender cards about how they felt about this pandemic and all that we were on, and some of them sort of for them were a bit difficult to say about, they felt a bit frustrated and God knows what, and basically it's really ridiculous the way that things are going, and the government's going, going back and forth and all that sort of stuff and that,
So some of those, when you talked about the Prime Minister coming on telly and the information wasn't clear, and so how did that make you feel?
Well, basically, it's just that it felt really frustrating, to sort of think about what information that you're using, because that nobody knew what was happening. Nobody knew about what we were going to do about this pandemic and all that sort of stuff. For that, the fact about it was that they were sort of like saying sort of things that was quite daft to be honest, because as I said about people should wear face mask and all that sort of thing, and sometimes if it's going to go on transport, people have been not sort of thinking about the virus and all that sort of thing. They're not covered, and getting the face mask and all that sort of thing. You see.
Raymond, thank you so much for your contribution. Thank you so much for coming and speaking to everybody who is watching tonight. I'm going to move us on
Thanks so
to
much.
thank you so much, Raymond. I'm going to move us on to a contribution now that I'm going to read out from Fleur Perry. She's a law student activist, and according to her Twitter profile, house cat until it's safe to go out. Brilliant. So I'm going to read her contribution because she's not able to be with us tonight for impairment related reasons, but she has sent us her contribution. She said, in the spring, NHS England published a document advising hospitals to not allow visitors except in very narrow and specific set of circumstances. This meant that many disabled people would be expected to attend appointments and inpatient stays alone, without PAs, without support workers, or without family members who know how to make sure that their needs are met. This was causing wasted hospital appointments with doctors who had no way to communicate with the person, arguments at the door, and people delaying going for urgent treatment. This didn't work for anyone. The guidance that was designed to prevent coronavirus entering the hospital had become a barrier to the people it was aimed at protecting. Not only was it a bad plan, but it was unlawful. Under the Equality Act 2010, public bodies like hospitals have to make reasonable adjustments, and they cannot favour people with one impairment over somebody else with another impairment when they do so. You can't create a situation where somebody's told they're the wrong sort of disabled. And as for preventing effective communication and safe care, we have the Human Rights Act 1998 to say that people have a right to being treated in a way that is not degrading and not to have their life put at risk by a policy that makes no sense. Myself and Mark Williams wrote separately to NHS England with the assistance of Chris Fry and Polly Sweeney, pointing out the issue and stating clearly that we would take legal action if this wasn't sorted out. We waited and did what we could to collect experiences of why this was important and to get the word out as far as possible. Thank you to everyone who got involved and shared and commented and retweeted. We won. NHS England's visitor guidance now allows for disabled people to be accompanied by people who need to be there. But it's not over. Every other week, somebody tells me that they've been trying to arrange an appointment and their PA can't come. Local hospitals are ignoring current NHS guidance in favour of the old one. If this is your hospital, please contact them and ask them to change it. So far, no one I have spoken to has needed to take legal action to change it, but if it comes to it, my understanding is that the law is on your side. If there's anything anyone needs to solve a discriminatory visitor policy at your local hospital, please let me know and we'll get to work. We send at this event all our best to Fleur and to her co-litigant Mark Williams, who also cannot be with us, and his PAs have the virus, but he assures us that they are doing well and that they are on the road to recovery. Thank you, honestly, so much for that statement to stalwart campaigners who have been fighting so hard, not just for themselves, of course, but as always for all of us. So thank you so much. I'm moving swiftly on now to Zohair Menzavelski Steinberg, co-disabled students officer, Student Union UCL. Hello to you. I want to ask you, Zohair, Zohar, sorry, and I know I can see that you're with us, so I'm just going to go straight into the question. Zohar, are you okay to come on screen?
Hi, yeah. Thanks.
Perfect. Hello, so nice to meet you. Students have rightly been angry at their treatment by business-orientated university authorities, but for disabled students, lockdown has produced access adjustments that have been fought for and denied. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so just to introduce myself, my name is Zohar, my pronouns are they and them. I'm a student at UCL and I'm one of the 2 disabled students officers at the UCL Students' Union, and that means that I also help run the UCL Disabled Students Network, which is a autonomous collective of disabled students who do activism and disabled cultural events. So from from my understanding of what's been going on, we're seeing the first significant clash between the eugenicist ableist model on which the university experience was built and the needs of the majority of their able students. For years, we in the Disabled Students Network, the DSN, were denied many things that we were asking for in terms of reasonable adjustments due to the apparently contemptible idea that it would turn UCL into a distance learning university. An additional, larger scale national issue with us getting our needs met has been the fact that unionized support for disabled students has been eroded over recent years, with the NUS abolishing their disabled students officer, leaving only the Cambridge disabled students officer as the single full-time one in the country. So most universities in the country are having the work of access consultants being done by unpaid part-time disabled students officers who simply can't achieve anything on the scale of what a full-time officer can achieve. University staff are overwhelmingly well-meaning, but are prevented from supporting us before they can even start because of a long-term institutionalized lack of support for them. So lockdown has led to some wins for us, such as finally being able to access most of our course activities from home, lecture recordings being a particularly big battle we've fought over the last few years. We can access class discussions from home, ask questions in writing in advance, and we have more genital extensions. But there are new challenges. There are courses where teaching happens over live, unrecorded calls and lectures that lack captioning. There are courses that don't accommodate for people who are struggling with lots of screen time, or who have an unsuitable home environment for studying. This is a particularly big set of wins and challenges for us at UCL DSN because we published a report in January called Disability Discrimination Faced by UCL Students and Recommended Measures. We found the majority of disabled respondents felt they'd experienced discrimination and were being systematically deprioritized. A key member even ended up dropping out. Coronavirus has accelerated some of our recommendations, especially in terms of recordings, but other things have been delayed because they require additional hiring. We have the opportunity to show the Academy a model of education that is not a one-size-fits-all, a future where there are Zoom options as well as in-person options, and where those of us who have to spend a lot of time at home still deserve to get an education. I'm very excited about the opportunities we now have the evidence to fight for, but I'm also worried that we'll be discarded yet again when all this is over if we don't have powerful allies on our side. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that contribution. I'm just going to remind people, because people want to see what our contributors are saying tonight. I'm just going to remind you that you can see this perfectly on YouTube and on Facebook too. Thank you so much to you for your contribution. I'm coming next now to Corinna Marchant, a deaf campaigner and Labour prospective parliamentary candidate for Basingstoke in the 2019 general election. Do we have Corinna here? Amazing. Hello and welcome to you. Hello. Hi. I just want to ask you, what have been the main issues faced by deaf BSL users during the pandemic, Corinna?
I feel like a lot of people have been woken up by by what's happened in these issues. So people have had to stay a long time in their own houses, and when they do go outside, people are now wearing face masks, so we can't lip read. It's very isolating, and we're not able to engage with wider society because of that. There's always been barriers for deaf people. There's always been issues with communication. But we've always had this issue with communication and this barrier to access that. And we've been campaigning for a BSL Act for a long time. And without this BSL Act, we haven't been able to overcome these barriers. And I feel like this is a real opportunity to campaign for this and to win. The coronavirus has shown the necessity for it because we have not been able to access this information. For example, we've had the Prime Minister come on screen without an interpreter. And that's why the campaign group, Where is the Interpreter, was set up. And it's only fair, it's our right that the government would give us the same information than non-deaf people. And it's not appropriate that the BBC is offering to use their InVision interpreter on their very specific channels. It's not fair for the people that can't access that. If we had a BSL Act, we would be able to resolve these issues. In Scotland, they do have the BSL Act. And that means that, but unfortunately, it's not enough to just have legislation, because people can have that piece of paper and they can ignore it. We need to be able to work on what is in the policy and improve things. For example, a very small thing would be having an actual interpreter when the Prime Minister is given that information. But also, when you go into your council, it would allow deaf people to just access the same services as other people, because they would have a legal responsibility to provide an interpreter. So we want to ask, in regards to the coronavirus, like, we want to ask the government, what is going on? What we don't understand about the different tiers, because they don't have that information available in BSL. So we don't know how to keep ourselves safe. We don't know what to do because we haven't been given the same information in a language that we understand. We don't know the safety rules because that's not available to us in a language that we can access. It's our lives that are now at risk because we're not able to follow the rules. Again, I repeat it, if we had a BSL Act, if we had this legislation, this would really help us. A lot of deaf people have lost their lives to the coronavirus. I mean, I saw one example of somebody on a bus with a deaf child, and the mum took off her mask to communicate with her child. And the people on the bus looked at that mum and really forced, was saying, put your mask on, what are you doing? And I just felt really terrible for that child. What message is that sending that child? So people are saying, oh, you're risking us at giving us coronavirus because she'd taken her mask off to communicate with her child. So it has really impacted deaf people's lives, how they're able to engage with wider society, and it has been a very troubling time for deaf people and BSL users. Thank you very much.
I want to say thank you so much. I'm sure we would all support the BSL Act, absolutely no problem at all. And if the Prime Minister in their briefings can't even get it right, then it is, of course, up to a movement to force the Prime Minister to do things differently, or force the government to do things differently. Corinna, thank you so much for that contribution. I'm coming straight now to Karen Reisman. Karen, hello, it's so nice to see you. We don't have much time, and I know you've got to go to another event, but I do want to talk to you about this. We've just come out of another lockdown, straight into tears, but the government is pushing people back to work. What is the effect on disabled workers?
Right. I want to start by sort of thanking you for holding this celebratory event. I think it's great that there is an event to celebrate sort of at the International Day for disabled people, and that's great. And it's great that sort of, that we want to send solidarity greetings from People Before Profit. And the same thing I want to say, sort of in terms of when you asked me about sort of that they're now, because we're coming out of the second lockdown, driving people into work. One of the things that I think is that even before we came out of lockdown, loads and loads of people are still in work and are still being forced to do, whether they're in key worker positions, but actually loads of factories have kept going. Lots of people who you think, what on earth do you need to have banks? Do you need to have sort of, the defence industry? Or do we need emergency bombs and emergency weapons? It seems ludicrous, the people who are being forced into work despite what's gone on. And I think from the beginning, there's been an overriding emphasis from the government to say we need to have people in work because we make money out of people being in work. And even if there's a risk to doing that, and even if people lose their lives, then that's the price we have to pay for the economy. And one of the awful things that you have is not only have they been terrible, right, in terms of COVID, we have virtually more deaths than any other country in the world, and yet we are the 6th richest country in the world, but we've also been terrible at the economy. So it's not even as if there's a choice between the economy or between our health. They've done both badly. They've spent a fortune on it, and I do think that that's been a terrible, terrible price for people to work to pay. And I think at work, when it comes to people with disabilities, some of the hard-won adjustments that people have had to come to work then fell apart, and suddenly people who were saying, actually, I know I was safe doing this before COVID, but during COVID this is not safe, have had to rely on trade unions and on people to try and fight their corner. And I think it's been very difficult for people to do so. In some ways there's been an opening up of new ways of working which weren't available and weren't a possible adjustment, which suddenly are because of COVID. But I think we have to say that we have to stand together, and the more we stand together and fight for people's rights, and I think that's something that joining a union makes a real difference to doing. And I think that's solidarity with people fighting, saying we're not prepared to. One of the things that struck me as a disgrace from day one, they claimed people have died, but they had underlying health conditions or were elderly, as if that meant that they didn't matter and that was okay then. And I think we have to fight to say every single person matters, and that we are not accepting that you put profit before people time and time again, and we're going to stand up and fight for our rights.
Excellent contribution, Karen. Thank you so much. And I couldn't agree more. There has never been a proper lockdown. There have been whole swathes, millions of people who have never been able to shut themselves in at home and shield themselves from the virus because of that of forcing people back out to work and into non-essential work. Karen, thank you so much for that contribution. The last person in this panel that we are going to come to now is Mark Dunk. You're a DPAC activist and trade union activist. It's so great that you could join us tonight, Mark. Millions of people have and millions of workers have had to claim universal credit. And as a disabled worker who was furloughed, I mean, your story kind of tells it all, really. A disabled worker who was furloughed and then made redundant and then had to claim universal credit. What do you think are some of the key social security issues at this time? Unmute yourself. It's the phrase of the century. Apparently, like, unmute is now a word.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I think to answer your question, the main thing that sticks in my head when I'm thinking about my experience and what's gone on with the whole of it through furlough, through universal credit, is there's been a whole situation of people being left out, really, of the provision. It's been a really stressful and frightening experience to go through this as a disabled worker. I mean, before I was furloughed, it was seeing the alcohol gels and stuff appearing around work and thinking, should we be here? When you were seeing the virus sweeping across in that first wave in Europe, everyone talking about it and talking about being scared. But this is the only year where I've ever lost the same job twice. Lost my job and was then furloughed from it a couple of weeks later when that scheme was introduced. But for so many, that furlough scheme didn't apply. It wasn't there for you if you'd been sacked before a certain payroll day. It wasn't there for self-employed workers. It wasn't there for loads of people on 0 hours contracts. And this has just been a real disgrace and has never been solved, even though they've made a few adjustments because people have stood up and fought and said it was wrong. There's still huge numbers of people out there that need the support that I got from the furlough scheme when I was initially made redundant, that just can't access that. And so those people are thrown on the universal credit. And this was the situation for me, made redundant eventually after being furloughed for about 6 months, made redundant in the end of September. And that was, again, a stressful and frightening experience to go through. After applying for universal credit, I was asked to attend the job centre. And this was at a time when the government advice was not to attend the job centre. You went on the government website and said, don't attend the job centre. I get a message from my work coach saying, please come in for your first meeting about your universal credit claim to the job centre. And it turns out that this stuff really was discretionary. But this was at the time when the second wave was starting to rise. People are being called in the same way that they've irresponsibly opened schools. They'd had the same attitude. If you were claiming benefits, it didn't really matter if you caught the virus. Go to your job centre, spread it around, and that's a really scary thing to go through as a disabled worker. I'm quite good at advocating for myself, and went out there and was able to push back and get that cancelled. But I think that's the real thing: is there's so many people that are left out. Universal credit needs to be expanded. We need the 20 quid to be kept. People should get involved in the Unite Day of Action on the 9th. But also that needs to be expanded to all of the categories that didn't get the £20 up rating. All of the legacy benefits for disabled people and for people on legacy JSA claims. It should be everyone who's getting more money, because even with the 20 quid, universal credit isn't enough. They've been slashing our benefits that we need to fall back on when there's not work. And so many people haven't got work now. So we need to fight for better.
Mark, thank you so much. As if dealing with kind of living through a global pandemic isn't enough, then having to experience the harshness of the social security system on top of it all is just so much to deal with. Thank you so much for that contribution. I'm just going to make a little announcement now to say that we are going to have just a short break for about 5 minutes before our next amazing panel. And this is going to allow us to try and establish the Facebook Live again. And then we're going to see you back here just after 8 o'clock for our next wonderful panel, which is going to be hosted by the wonderful Ellen Clifford. So see you again in just a few